Welcome to this video where we are going to talk about internationalization. What is internationalization? It's also called I-18N. There are 18 characters here, so it's I-18N. Internationalization is nothing but customizing your services for different people around the world. What do I mean by that? Let's look at an example. Let's open up the Hello World controller that we created earlier. Create Hello World internationalized. And let's say this is returning good morning. If I invoke this service, the result you already know, right? It would return back good morning. That's basically what is happening in here. However, let's say this request is coming in from France, or let's say it's coming in from Netherlands or Japan. You'd want to customize this message to where the request is coming from. I cannot say good morning to everybody. Probably to somebody in France, I would need to say bonjour and things like that. Internationalization might be a complex topic, especially if you have data from databases also that needs to be internationalized. In this example, we'll look at simple data from the messages, which is going to be internationalized. To be able to internationalize our good morning service, what we'll do is we'll need to configure a few things. We'll configure something called a locale resolver. We would want to configure it to use a default locale of locale.us. So if somebody does not specify where he's calling it from or what kind of customization he needs, then he'll get the default locale US. And we would also customize a resource bundle. So we would want to have a list of properties which will be internationalized, and we would want to store them in something called resource bundle. Resource bundle message source is a Spring MVC concept, or actually it's a Spring concept for handling your properties. And after that, when we update the controller, you would see that we would need to use something called message source, and we would use a header called accept language. Let's get started with the implementation. What we need to do is we need to first configure a locale resolver, and we would need to configure a resource bundle message source. Let's start with that. I'll open up the RESTful web services application thing. I would want to add a bean. I would want to configure another bean in here. So the way we do that in Spring is add bean. I'll import it in. The first bean I would want to create is that of a locale resolver. As I said, I would want to configure a default locale. So locale resolver. I'll use the one from Org Spring Framework Web Servlet. I'll call this method as public. So this is going to return me a public locale resolver. I'll initialize a simple session locale resolver. So session locale resolver. I would want to set a default locale. I would say the default locale is locale.us as we discussed earlier. We'll return the locale resolver back. What we would want to do is we would want to store our resources, our properties in specific files in here. So I'll create a new property file, source means resources. I'm creating a new file, and let's general file, and I'll call this messages DOS properties. This will contain the default one. So let's just say good morning message is equal to the default I would use is good morning. I'll also copy this and create another one. This is for the French locale, FR, French locale. I would want to say for in the French locale, I would want to not call it good morning, but I would want to call it bonjour. Okay, I'm not good at French, so bonjour. We would need something to read these properties and customize them based on the input accept header. How do we do that? We need to define another bean in our RESTful web services header, which is called resource bundle message source. So we'll configure a resource bundle message source. I'll do control space to import it in. So let's now go ahead and create an instance of the resource bundle message source. Let's return it back first. When we create a message source, we need to set something called what is the name of the messages. So the messages properties, the way we named it is message.properties messages underscore fr.properties, right? So we need to set that in. So I'll set it as message source dot set base name. The base name we want to set is messages. We have configured a locale resolver. We said we will use a session locale resolver, and we would use a locale of US as the default, and we configured a message source. Now what we would need to do is we would need to update our service to use these. So we need to update our hello world internationalized. I need to update it to use the message source. How do I do that? I would need to create a message source in here. I don't need to make this public. I can make it private. Private message source. I'll say message source. I do want to auto wire it in. So whatever bean which we created as message source in earlier, that will be the one which will be auto wired into every controller wherever we configure that. And now I would want to pick up the value from message source. I would want to say pick the value, don't return good morning back. What I would want you to do is pick the value from message source. Message source dot get message. The name of the message that we gave, where is it? It's here. Good morning dot message, right? So let's pick that up and put it in here. And the local is something which needs to be given as input to this particular service. So how do I get local as an input? So I would need to have something called local. How can a consumer pass the local in? He can send it as one of the header attributes. Before we go further, I'm getting compilation error. One of the things I would need to actually do is add in another argument. So I need to pass in a null. If we look at the get message, the one which we are using, we can actually pass in a set of arguments to customize this message. We are not using any variables in the message, so this is fine. I can pass in null here, and I would want to use the local. However, the local comes as part of our request header. We need to tell that. So request header. Now let's import this in. I'll use Spring Framework's request header. As part of request header, I need to tell something. I need to tell what is the request header that contains this. The request header which would be containing this is accept language. So based on the accept language header, we would decide the local. The other thing I would want to make sure is this is not really required, right? So I don't really want it to be passed all the time. So if the accept language is not passed, we'll pick up the default local. The default local we have already configured is US. So I'll say required is equal to false. Now let's send a get request to hello world internationalized. Before I send it, now we also require a accept header, right? So what is the thing that we require? We need something called accept language. So I'll go ahead to the thing, and you can type in accept, and you'd see accept language come up. I would want to start with the US locale for now. So it's good morning, right? So if I change this to FR, this is in the request headers. I'm changing the request headers. You can say authorization headers. This is where it is. And if I say FR, bonjour. If I used any other thing, NL, for example, where does it go to? It goes to the default, which is good morning. Now, if I want to configure a different message for Netherlands domain, all that I need to do is messages underscore NL dot properties, and I can go ahead and say, I have an idea. It's called Goedemorgen. I think something of that kind. Okay, let's now execute the request again. Now you'd see you are getting the value in the Dutch locale. Basically, what we have done in this specific step is understood how we can use the message source to internationalize our services. It is important that when you are designing your services, all the text messages go into these messages.properties. That would ensure that everything is internationalized. Also, the other thing which you need to take into consideration are the values in the database. So you should work out a way where you'd be able to pass the locale to the database and get the values from the database according to that specific locale. Until next step, bye bye.